We are continuing this class with that we're calling Conversations in Community. We're looking at contemporary questions in our society, in our country, in our world, and we're looking at them through the lens of our faith. Today we're joined by John Peyton. We're going to talk a bit about Jacksonville, some of the opportunities and challenges for our city, and then the role the church can play in serving those around us. I know John is someone who probably doesn't need much of an introduction, but I'll give one anyway. John Peyton is the president of Gate Petroleum Company. He served two terms as mayor of Jacksonville, serving as mayor during our city's first Super Bowl. He implemented initiatives to advance literacy, to reduce crime, and improve health of the St. Johns River. He worked hand in hand with the city's economic development arm and the Jacks Chamber to cultivate domestic and international business. John is an alumnus of Mercer University and Harvard Business School Executive Education Program, and has participated in Leadership Jacksonville and Leadership Florida. He has two sons, Connor and Kent, who I see here but I haven't had a chance to meet yet, but you are both mentioned in his bio, so it's good to meet both of you. John, before we start, I want to thank you very much for being here. I want to note that although it's not in your bio, you are a faithful Episcopalian, which should have been the first thing in your bio.
We'll change that. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to start by asking you for a brief overview of your time as mayor, and I wanted to know if you could reflect on some of the greatest challenges the city faced when you were mayor, or to put another way, what were your highest priorities when you became mayor, and how were you able to address those?
Well, Mark, let me just say it's great to be back here at the cathedral. I've got really fond memories of this church. It was here that 20 years ago, actually, we had our prayer breakfast here on the day of my inauguration, and it was probably here that the gravity of the job really was lowered itself on my shoulders. It was a special day. And then, of course, my sons were baptized here. Connor was baptized 18 years ago, and then Kent 16 years ago. So love this place, and I'm glad to be back. And it's great to see friends in the audience. I told Jenny Myrick she could probably give this talk. She's been around City Hall more than I have collectively. And, of course, Kate has been a phenomenal leader. In fact, when I was in office, I remember when Kate was recruited here, she came to the mayor's office and asked, what she could do, what this church could do to help Jacksonville be more successful. And I always remember that conversation. I valued that conversation. And now I'm getting to know Mark, who's a great addition to this place, and I think the two of them make a great team. So it's great to be here. And as for the city, it's been a while since I've served. I went in 2003, came out in 2011. And a lot of our issues are the same, but a lot of them have changed. And so I would say, when I was in office, we had probably a different set of priorities as a community. If you were to ask folks back then, what was the number one concern, the number one opportunity for improvement, it would have been education. That there wasn't a close second. Education was the biggest concern of the day. Today, I think if you ask that same question, people would say reduction of violence and making Jacksonville a safer place. That continues to be a challenge, and I would think the safety of our citizens is number one priority and number one concern. It was really not until, I guess, halfway through my term that the crime issue really became the number one focus and the number one concern. We'd had some really tragic deaths of young people in our city, and that was something that we took seriously and spent many years trying to craft a response to. And I'm very pleased that Mayor Deegan is equally committed to a program that we launched, many years ago that I think it really offers a blueprint for building a safer city. And of course, we in the short term, having a Super Bowl was a big deal. And having a successful Super Bowl was a big deal, and making sure we didn't embarrass ourselves. Expectations were very low for our city, particularly a market of this size. So getting through that, Super Bowl 39 was kind of our short-term issue. Safety was kind of a long-term issue, but I think that the underlying theme, what we really pursued for a better, healthier community was making sure we had opportunities, economic opportunities for our citizens, and making sure we had a workforce that was able to rise to the occasion. We had an education system that was performing, and people were able to match their ability with the opportunity. And when those two things come together, when ability and opportunity come together, you have a healthier place. And that solves a lot of problems. A lot of problems that government tries to solve every day can be remedied in many ways by a healthy economy and a capable workforce. So that was really something that I brought to office. I think that was fairly unique, having a business background, understanding the power of what opportunity can be and what it can do, as long as our citizenry can have the skill set to meet the demands of a changing marketplace. So in a nutshell, those were kind of the priorities. Some of those issues are still with us. The safety is still an issue. It is not unique to Jacksonville. Most major cities in this country have an issue with violence, and there is not a silver bullet. There's no city that can say they have conquered it or they've solved it. But I will say that Jacksonville, I think, has the greatest opportunity to make a difference if we all work together and have good leadership.
One of the unique challenges at the time that you served as mayor was obviously this significant economic recession that we saw nationally. How did that impact the city's budget, and how did you and the city respond to that?
So we all remember 2007. We had a colossal economic collapse. This was something that no one had anticipated. I certainly didn't as mayor. And the implications on everyone were significant, including individuals, corporations, and particularly governments. We had a dynamic at City Hall where we'd had a governor that had just reduced the millage rate for counties. That was passed in the form of Amendment 1. Many of you may remember we fought it hard in Jacksonville. We actually voted it down in Jacksonville, but it passed statewide. That reduced our millage rate. Then we had a pension obligation that was growing. Pension debt, just for perspective, when I took office, the pension obligation was about $30 million on a $1 billion budget. When I left office, it was over $100 million on about $1 billion plus budget. So pension debt was growing, revenue was declining, thanks to our governor at the time, and then the recession hit. So we were absolutely in a financial free fall. So it really required all of us at City Hall to take a hard look at how we get through it without just destroying our city with the reduction of services and the way we take care of our people. The conclusion was we had to raise revenue, and there was no way around it. In absence of raising revenue, the diminishment of our city services was going to be at a point where it would become a long-term problem is the way we operate our city, both with safety, our ability to maintain parks, libraries, everything, infrastructure, roads, paving, bridges, everything we do in government. So we actually put together a financial package in the budget where we raised revenue in the middle of a recession when people were being laid off. And this was something I actually had campaigned against, was increasing revenue. I did not want to do it. No mayor wants to raise revenue. It's unpopular. No one wants to pay more, particularly when you're in an economic cycle that is really devastating. So we put in the budget the notion of really diversifying our revenue streams. So we ended up passing 3 fees. There was a garbage fee, a stormwater fee, and a city utility franchise fee. And those fees together, combined with an increased millage rate, raised about $100 million on a $1 billion budget. In absence of that, the city would have looked like a completely different place. Response time for public safety would have gone up. Our parks, mowing, road paving, the basics, the blocking and tackling of municipal government would have been at risk. So we passed it. It was not easy. It was not popular. I was, just to give you an idea of the political capital that you expend when you do that, I was reelected with 80% of the vote. I think if you were to take a poll toward my last few years, I would be lucky to clear 50% approval rating. People do not want to pay more taxes, and you're not ever going to find a campaign based on raising revenue. It's just not going to happen. We did it. It was the right thing to do. It was painful. But I would say, in addition to that, when you look at Jacksonville relative to our peer cities and how we invest and how we collect, we are really not even on the chart when it comes to per capita expenditures in government. If you look at our park spending, and Jenny knows this better than anybody, our park budget is not even on the chart compared to other cities, how much we spend in our parks. Barbara Ketchum and I have worked together on this issue for many years, but what has happened is we have fallen prey to this popular political behavior of reducing revenue and reducing taxes and pledging never to raise any kind of fees or taxes. So with this diminishment of revenue over time, we have fallen behind in our ability to deliver services. So what I've challenged folks, which is easy for me being out of office, is to say, look, we really have to ask ourselves what kind of city we want to live in and whether we're willing to invest. And I think in local government, you get what you pay for. You invest and you can see it. You really have a hard time seeing it with federal spending or state spending, but with local spending, you can see it. You can see the difference. And our city's worthy of our investment. And when we all chip in collectively, it makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference. So I advocate almost on a daily basis, particularly with people that are considering running for office. We have to look at the facts. We have to look at how we compare. Are we competitive? Is our quality of life competitive? How are we doing relative to other cities? Benchmarking ourselves. In almost every instance, be it public safety or roads or parks or infrastructure, libraries, whatever we do as a government, our spending is way, way below what other cities are spending. And it makes it difficult to get things done. So I've become a conservative Republican that believes tax increases and fees would actually be a good thing in our city. And it wouldn't take us above everyone else, just getting on par, gradually increasing the revenue so we can do the things that would enhance this community in a dramatic way.
Are there any obvious peer cities that you think about that have a higher revenue and examples where they've invested that have really helped propel the city forward?
Where I saw it on a personal level, when my boys were playing soccer, we would travel around. We had travel soccer, and you just see it in the parks. You go to another county, you go to another city, like, oh my gosh, this is a really nice soccer field. I mean, they're actually maintaining the grass, they're mowing it. You can see it and feel it. And I would say, particularly down south, you've got two things happening in Jacksonville. First of all, our average tax base is pretty low relative to the rest of the state. I mean, our average home is significantly lower. The cost of an average home, the taxable value of an average home is significantly lower in Jacksonville than it is in other parts of the state. You combine that with the lowest millage rate in the state, we're beginning to really starve ourselves from a revenue side. So almost any other place you see, particularly in the southeast, you're going to see greater investment. And probably the most obvious place is in the park system. We have the largest park system in the United States of America in Duval County. How many people knew that? I mean, it's just the largest park system in the country, and we spend the least per person of any city you can think of. I mean, and certainly any city in Florida and across the southeast. Imagine for a moment a park system where we actually had the revenue to invest, and not just in the way we maintain the park, but in the way we program the park. There was a day when a park would have staff, and when kids get out of school, there's someone there with a baseball bat and a ball and a glove, and there's actually something to do. And this, I think, goes right back to public safety and the success and health of a community, having activities for kids after school. So I think that's probably the most obvious place, but there are other anecdotal examples throughout the system where our anemic spending does show up when you pay attention.
On a personal note, it has to be challenging to make a decision that you know is going to be unpopular, to support a decision you know is going to be unpopular because you believe it's in the best interest of the city, to see your approval ratings going down. What gave you the strength to do that, to remain committed to what you believe was right?
The reality that I would never run again. That's what got me through. And that's why a second term is so important. And I keep telling everyone, look, Mayor Deegan needs to be successful, and success means 8 years, because the last 4 years is where you can really make a difference. And so having that freedom, I think what happens is the electorate often rewards the wrong behavior in politicians, and it's like sugar. It tastes really good at the time. Saying you're not going to pay, you're not going to raise taxes, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, and promising things that often are not deliverable. But I think finding someone who's serving not for a political career, but because they care about the community, and hopefully it's not their number one form of revenue, and it's not their livelihood, makes a difference. And I think when you have folks that are serving and that's their primary income, or they're planning a lifetime career in politics, it shapes their thinking and it shapes their behavior. And I think I really, that's one of the first things I want to know when I'm going to support a candidate. What are your long-term goals? I'm not looking for an ambitious politician that wants to be president someday. We want someone who's going to bring a set of skills, serve, be burdened with the facts, and then get out, get out of the system. And I think that's the biggest challenge with the way politics works today.
Yeah, so one of the counterintuitive takeaways is it's helpful to find a politician who doesn't care so much about being popular.
Right. And that's an oxymoron, because most politicians have these needs, right? They have a likability issue, and that's fine. But listen, the reality is this: the decisions that need to be made at the local level and at the state level and at the federal level are very difficult decisions, and that involves trade-offs that many of us do not want to embrace, and that requires shared pain. Look at the federal level. The national debt is completely out of check, but who wants to give up all that we enjoy? And there's fortunately at the state level and at the city level, we are forced by law to balance the budget. We have to make hard calls, and there's ultimate accountability at local level, because when you're a policymaker and you go to the grocery store and you're doing something that someone doesn't like, you're going to hear about it. I mean, you have accountability at the local level, not so much at the state and federal level. So, but I think, but another thing I'll say is I learned while serving, and I've shared this with Mayor Deegan. People want to be led. The community wants to be led. And this is a city that enjoys their mayor, typically. I mean, you really have to work hard for a city not to want to support the mayor. And if you provide the vision and you provide the facts and you paint the picture of where you're trying to go, people will pay more. And we have a pattern of that. It happened with the Renaissance Plan at Austin. It happened during the Better Jacksonville Plan with Mayor Delaney. We funded Jacksonville Journey to the tune of $30 million that we'd never spent, primarily on a lot of social spending, to try to right the ship on the violence in our community. It can be done. It's painful, but people want to see the vision, and they want to hear how you get there and what it's going to look like once it's implemented. And they're willing to sacrifice, and that's really what you're asking is some level of sacrifice for a vision that is going to cost money.
So other than the fact that we have less revenue than many of our peer cities, what are the actions that we could take to strengthen the city? It sounds like it might be about violence. That might be the most pressing issue today from your perspective.
I think that is one of our biggest challenges, but I want to say it's not unique to Jacksonville. Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of urban environments have this issue, but the challenge with this issue is the solutions are very, very long-term solutions. Many of the folks that are committing the violent acts are young. They don't wake up and suddenly become violent. It is a cultivation cycle that occurs over time. And the way you arrest that cycle is you start really early. And our focus is 4-year-olds. I mean, that's where our whole literacy program was focused on 4-year-olds, because we knew up to 3rd grade, you learn to read, and from 3rd grade on, you read to learn. And if you don't make that transition, you have a really tough story. They forecast prison population on literacy rates of 3rd graders. I mean, there's a direct link. So if you don't engage your young people in an intellectual way, and as a member of this community, as someone who belongs, there's a very steep price to pay. And so the challenge with that program is you will not see the rewards while you're in office. That is going to be something that happens many, many years down the road. And that's why Jacksonville Journey, which we introduced in my second term, has had a hard time getting funded. It was significant investment in young people, significant investment in early literacy, significant investment in after-school programming. Certainly there's an enforcement component. That's important, but by the time the police show up, the story's done. It's over. I mean, it's what goes in before that that's so critical. And I would say that to the taxpayer who's concerned about return on investment, it is a lot cheaper. It is a lot cheaper for intervention and prevention than it is for incarceration. You're still paying for it. I mean, the taxpayer's on the hook. Incarceration's expensive. If you can start early, and by the way, it's a lot more fun. It's a lot more fun. If you start early and you engage these kids, and I would say this church and Episcopal Children's Services, efforts like that are making a huge difference. They were a huge partner of our literacy program when I was in office. That's been a big focus of theirs. There are a lot of pockets of success like this. Organizations that are just a force for good, and good is infectious. And so investing in these organizations that are trying to reach young people, that really where you can change the trajectory to where Jacksonville becomes not only safer, it becomes more prosperous because you've got a workforce now that can contribute versus one that doesn't.
So I've heard you talk about the desire to improve literacy and education and decrease violence and crime and the city's billion-dollar budget. And to some extent, it makes me feel like, well, what can we do here as the cathedral? Because we don't have a billion-dollar budget. What's the role of the Church Universal, of this cathedral, in improving the city and serving those around us? What's the role the church can play, in other words, that the city can't play as well?
So, interesting fact. In Jacksonville, we have the highest concentration of churches where we have the most violence, which is a stunning statistic. And one of our challenges was, how do we engage the community of faith to be a greater force of good in these challenged communities? And I would say, first of all, you have to be aware and informed of the issues, and you have to challenge our office holders to make difficult decisions on the budget. It is impossible for a church and a church budget to address this issue on their own. It isn't hard for a corporation to do it on their own. When you talk about the dollars that flush through City Hall, the magnitude of the dollars, that's where the difference can be made. So having a community within a community like this church that stays informed and is burdened with the facts and challenges our elected leaders to make the hard choices to invest in those things that don't always offer an immediate reward. So I think, we have a representative form of government here, and you have to be engaged as an individual, as an organization, for those things that are important. Budgets reflect priorities, and the priorities are set by what the people want, oftentimes. So if this congregation and the individuals within it engage in a meaningful way, you can see the priorities change, and then it becomes reflected in the budget. Secondly, I think downtown is a special place. It should be a special place. This church is an anchor here. The opportunities to be a part of what downtown is becoming. It's a place where we come together as a community. We come worship, we come to be entertained, we come to enjoy nature, the river, the activation of the river. We come here for employment. It's important, and I think the health of this church and this community around it is just as important to the fabric of downtown as any other component. And I think the church has done a good job being that partner and that advocate and that presence for downtown. So I think that's really important. So I to the children's services, I can't tell you enough. They were Connie Seffel and the whole group over there. They do a lot of good work, and I'm not sure everyone is aware of the work they do. And I think more awareness. Their focus is at-risk youth And that is where the difference needs to be made primarily. So I'm very proud of that work and the advocacy and the support they provide.
In a few minutes, I'm going to open this up for questions from anyone, but do you have any final thoughts before we open up for questions?
No, I really don't. I love the Q&A. That's my favorite part, and I'd say we move right in.
Yes, if you have a question, please wait till Nancy brings a microphone to you. It's sort of like earlier, even if you project, people online can't hear it, so make sure you speak into the microphone because many people participating in this class will be online.
Thank you, Mayor, for coming, and I have to tell you, as somebody who's been around City Hall a long time, I think your administration is one of the best.
Oh, well, thank you.
I would like for you to comment on two things. There's a national dialogue going on about sacred places. Dean Kate and I have written and published on this topic. Sacred places. Sacred places, which is a term meant for downtown churches, which are dying. And we have formed the Cathedral District to rejuvenate this 36 blocks. But there are 5 historic churches in the district, and each one has their varying degree of success. Some have 30 people that come there. This one has hundreds of people that come here. So what role do these magnificent architectural beauties have to do with downtown redevelopment? Can you just touch on that just a little bit?
So, yeah, we were driving in this morning with my 2 sons, and we were talking about this area of town and how many churches are here, and we're actually trying to find parking. I said, well, that's the wrong church. That's somebody else's parking lot. So, Jenny, just without having given a lot of thought to this topic, Mark and I have had this conversation about what's happening in the Protestant faith and what's happening in the national trends. And I know we're watching enrollment challenges in this particular faith, and I think a lot of the Protestant churches are having similar issues. And I believe that churches like this are going to be the survivors, a place where you can combine resources, you can celebrate an amazing architecture, a fantastic choir, stunning leadership, and a source of great inspiration. And so I'm guessing, projecting out many years, this place will be really, really important to this church, to this whole community of Episcopal churches. And I'd like to think that's true in a lot of these churches. I'm very concerned about the enrollment issues we're seeing, particularly in the smaller parishes around the community. So I think, I think we've got great days ahead because this, in many ways, is the mothership, right? And I think this is where we can all come together and combine resources and create an amazing spiritual community right here in downtown. And I think housing is a great component of that, and I know there's a lot of efforts to include housing around this place of worship. And I'm very optimistic on downtown, by the way. Jacksonville is behind most cities in the southeast with downtown redevelopment, but I think the housing component is starting to become real. We've always thought if we could get to about 10,000 units downtown, residential units, we would start to see a more vibrant downtown, a more active street life, more viable retail, and that we're getting there. We're getting there, and I think the church is one of those amenities, and that I think can help create that. And so I'm bullish on downtown and the role this community of faith right here this can play in that. I'd want to give more thought to that though too. That's a good question. And
Kate, can I ask you to tell me one thing? Can you remind me how much investment in real estate we brought into downtown through CDJ?
Well, Ginny and I know that well. It's between $42 and $44 million that Ginny has brought into this cathedral district in the past 6 years.
That's great.
All of residential investment.
That's impressive. Yeah.
John, thank you so much for being with us. I know Episcopalians tend to be private in our profession of faith, but I'd love to hear, why are you Episcopalian? What draws you to this particular branch of Christianity?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it wasn't really my choice, but it's my place of comfort, and I love this faith. My grandfather was the Episcopalian priest for Trinity Parish, my great-grandfather, in St. Augustine for over 30 years. So I grew up in that church. My family's been deeply committed to that church for many, many years. So I spent a lot of time going to church with my grandparents, and so that really kind of anchored my experience. From there, I moved back. I was in D.C. I went to the cathedral there for a while. I find a lot of my spiritual inspiration through music, and I used to go to organ recitals there every Sunday afternoon in D.C. Came back, I was at Christ Church, which is a very special place. I love Christ Church. Did Discovery Weekend there. Came into town to serve as mayor. Was married in 2003, and we came here briefly, but we ended up at All Saints because it's right around the corner from our home, and that's where I got to know Guy. It was good to see Guy this morning here in this parish, and now a lot of time at Christ Church and All Saints occasionally. I have probably because of my upbringing, I have just a deep comfort here in this church, and I can't imagine really being anywhere else. I have gone to some of the contemporary services in Episcopal churches in various places, and it really wasn't the same for me. And I think it's what I know, it's what I've been exposed to, and it's been very grounding for me. But I often wonder, for those who have not been grounded in this church for so long, what the experience would be like. If you came in off the street and you weren't grounded in the ritual, in the tradition, what kind of experience would it be? And I think it'd be very different, and it'd be almost intimidating and kind of mystical, if you weren't indoctrinated in this faith. And Mark and I had a great lunch about this, talking about, we have been, indoctrinated from an early age in a very comfortable place as a result of it. But how does the church, meet that person where they are without the deep rooting and the understanding of the ritualistic nature of our church and our service? But for me, I've found my home. I know where it is, but I am concerned about the trends. I'm in business, and you look at trends, and you look at viability, and you look at benchmarking, and all those things, and I just, I think we've got some real challenges on the horizon in this community of faith, and it concerns me greatly because I think faith is an important part of a healthy city and a healthy life, and so it's something for all of us to work on. I'm glad we have Kate and Mark to worry about that, and I don't have to wake up every morning worrying about that. We've got great leadership here, and I come to the service this morning, and I feel very optimistic about where we're headed.
I don't think Jesus said just the ordained are called to ministry, though. In the back of the prayer book, there's a question: who are the ministers of the church? Do you know what the answer is? It says the ministers of the church are the lay people, bishops, priests, and deacons. So all of us are called to this work, John. As a matter of fact, you are called as a layperson before I am on that list.
Okay, case in point.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's right. I think I hit a nerve.
And I don't mean just John. That applies to everyone here.
Everybody.
John, thank you for being here this morning. I know you talked earlier in your administration that you were kind of blindsided when the economy took a dive, a big dive. And I feel like maybe as a city, we're going to be blindsided as reading the papers every day about climate change and about we're right now in the midst of incredible heat waves and loss of life that's predicted and everything else. We've been talking about resiliency. It's been in the news and the topic of conversation. I know former administration has taken steps towards that, but we're way behind the curve on where we probably need to be. And I'm just curious from your perspective and what you've seen and learned so far, what sort of comments you might have about that for Jacksonville. Right. We live in a swamp.
It's a great question, and it affects everybody. And it's a hard question for someone like me, who's in the business of selling liquid fuels. And so I think we all recognize there is a significant change going on. We can debate what's causing it all day, every day, but there's significant change, and the implications of that on our city are significant. I would not underestimate the difficulty of this issue. It is not an easy issue. It is a very, very difficult issue. And to think that there is one solution or silver bullet or panacea that's going to solve it is completely unrealistic. Our economy and our livelihood is based on fossil fuels. That is real, and the notion that we can pull ourselves off overnight, I think, is almost mythical. The remedies that we are looking at, there are some great alternatives, but it is naive to think that we can fuel our quality of life at today's cost without the liquid fuel component, and it's going to be a very, very gradual experience. The electric cars, I think, get a lot of credit for performance, but if you think for a minute that that is a solution, I think you need to revisit the issue. Batteries, what makes up the batteries, is problematic. The minerals coming from hostile countries, not friendly to the United States. It's minerals being stripped from the earth to create these batteries, disposing of the batteries. The grid cannot handle the charging of these cars today. The investment that is required for that grid to get to a point to where it can charge cars is unfathomable. I mean, it's really expensive. So the economic implications of making a transition are huge, and the trade-off of what people are willing to spend to get there is a direct pocketbook implication. So it's a significant issue. I think there are ways to live our lives in a more conservative way as far as conservation goes, and there are things we can do as individuals that make a difference. And cities certainly can plan for resilience with the way we manage our public spaces and the way we manage our waterfronts and how we build and spec buildings and how we demand they be built. We can do things there, but it's a really, really complicated issue, and no one pays attention to it more closely than I do. I'm in a business that is directly impacted by it, but there's also no one more concerned about it than I am. I mean, I'm living it like you are. I mean, we're seeing what's happening around us. So I think we just have to continue to push innovation and challenge ourselves with technology to find ways to make it better. But it's not easy. It's not easy, and I wish it was. But I would say the biggest challenge, what we probably don't estimate properly, is to get where we're trying to go would be so expensive to every single person in this country that you almost get priced out of reasonableness as far as what it costs to get the grid right, what it costs to get the conversion right, so I don't have the answer. I don't have the answer, and I'm sympathetic to those that are in office that are trying to find the answer. It's a tough one. Yeah.
Mayor Peyton, I don't know what role you played in helping save an organization that I volunteered for since 1985, Jacksonville Learn to Read.
Yeah.
But in 2008, the city took us under their wing, and we were able to get offices in the library, and it was saved, and now it's once again thriving. But you asked a little earlier what we can all do, and I'm sure the priests are like rolling their eyeballs. There goes Ken again. If anybody here wants to help out in adult literacy, and it's 20% illiteracy rate in the city, as you mentioned earlier, 60% over in the prison, you can, I have my card right here in my pocket, and you can volunteer to help teach someone to read for a couple of hours a week. We have a waiting list, and don't ask me, ask Harriet Myers. She's helping me out in my class. And it's a wonderful thing that somebody can do for just a couple of hours a week and meet somebody that's out of your box and become very well bonded with them. And as you know, poverty, literacy, and crime are all interrelated.
They're all connected.
So that's all I need to say.
That's good.
Thank you.
No, it's a good plug. That's true.
Well, and frankly, it's a beautiful example where a decision by city government creates opportunities for individuals to serve and directly impact other people's lives. It's a beautiful example.
Right.
Hi, I'm so glad you're here. We often hear about we need higher taxes, but Jacksonville did something so unique. It was before we lived here, but I've been always impressed with the Better Jacksonville plan, where very wise people came and put forth what things needed to be done and what the bill would be. And the taxes were raised, and as each thing was accomplished, it was announced and paid off. Why could we not do something like that again? Yeah. Making it clear, what is the bill? What do we need and how much?
Yeah, the Better Jacksonville Plan is probably one of the best public policy initiatives we've seen in a long time, in that the community voted on it. Here's what you get. This is what it's going to cost. 0.5-cent sales tax, right? It's going to be a $2 billion work plan, and this is the list of things you're going to get for it. I inherited that program from Mayor Delaney. He passed it. I got to implement it, and I'm the one that got to build the courthouse, which was the most unfun project and caused enormous stress. But I think that's what the voters want. They want to hear what you're going to do, what is it going to cost, and let me decide. And the voters overwhelmingly supported that plan. And so I think we actually, it probably didn't hit the radar, we actually kind of did that again. Mayor Curry actually extended the Better Jacksonville plan, and the 0.5-cent sales tax, he extended it into the future. It passed the vote of the people. And that money was used for pension obligation. So we were trying to reduce the pension obligation and probably lock in the unions on their retirement benefit program. So that was done. It's not as sexy. There are no projects to show for it, but it did reduce a lot of financial obligation. And we basically converted our unions, police and fire, public safety, primarily into a 401k plan, which limits our exposure versus the defined benefit, which did not limit our exposure, and that's what created the cycling and the growing of our pension obligation. But I think your point's well taken, and that's just leadership, right? It takes leadership and creating a vision and selling it, and my experience is people buy in if you have the right message and the right deliverer of the messenger.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. And after that, we'll pray. And then if anyone has any questions individually, you may be able to come up and ask John.
Well, hi, John. I haven't heard you all talk about the importance of homelessness, specifically in the downtown area, but all over Jacksonville. And I noticed that Miami brags about only having 800 people that are homeless, and they've accomplished quite a bit. And collaboratively, it seems like the churches, starting with the downtown churches, could come out with a message of how that homelessness is treated from within each church, because each church has its own program. And I just want to know, basically, how important is that to our safety issue, and economically too?
I'd be careful not to link homelessness as a safety issue. Homelessness often is a mental health issue, and so when you look at the violence in our community, homelessness is not really on the radar as far as a contributing factor. But from a public policy perspective, we've had a challenge in Jacksonville about how we deal with homelessness, because it runs juxtaposed to our desire to be a residential-friendly, vibrant downtown, and if people view the homelessness issue as a barrier to people wanting to live in downtown. One thing that is unique about Jacksonville is we have, over time, and it probably wasn't intentional, we have basically put all of our services for homelessness in our urban core, and we have more beds in our urban core than any city in Florida. Now, I know Sulzbacher and others are now working to move those beds and that support system. We want the support system, and there needs to be a place to go. But if we want downtown to be a vibrant place where you live, work, and play, we probably want to move the beds outside of the urban core. So, and I think there's a move afoot, which is probably the right move. But every city, again, not to diminish the challenge, but every city has this problem. I would say ours is better than and more manageable than most cities. I was having dinner with someone last night. They were visiting San Francisco last week, and they literally said they felt like they were on the set of a zombie movie in the streets of downtown San Francisco. The homelessness was so out of control, and they would go into restaurants in downtown San Francisco, and they'd have a bucket by the door for needles that were picked up off the street where people were trying to dispose of, needles for injections. So relative to other cities, I think we're in pretty good shape. We've got a lot of great service providers here. One thing that happens in downtown Jacksonville, which is as perception, if you're in downtown San Francisco or DC or New York or Chicago, there's a lot of street life. There's a lot of people walking. There's a lot of people out. When you're walking in downtown Jacksonville, there's not much street life. The only encounter you may have is a homeless person. It's not that we have that many more. That's all you see. That's your encounter. That's your interaction. And I think we have to keep that perspective. I think we've got great service providers. We're intentional about our strategy. No city has solved it, and we're in a favorable climate, so it's reasonable to think that we could have a greater problem than we already have. But getting the beds outside of the urban district, I think, is smart for urban renewal. But these service providers need the resources to be effective, and I think we're very blessed to have some great service providers.
I think Joel had one question, and if anyone else has any other questions, I invite you to come up afterwards to talk to John.
John, I appreciate your being here and your experience in forming policy to address the issues that you've addressed when in your leadership as mayor and as a business leader. We have a unique government set up in the fact that we have consolidated government, and we don't have a focus on some of the projects like downtown that other cities enjoy. At this point, in looking back, do you think that consolidated government has been a help or a hindrance to our progress?
Joel, that's a great question. I actually made a note to talk about that, but I could spend an hour on this topic.
You have 2 minutes.
So I'm not going to spend an hour, but let me just give you the long and short. We are blessed to have one of the most efficient forms of government in the United States of America. We have consolidated, in 1968, we consolidated our government. We merged county and city, and it gives us more efficiency. It gives us more buying power. It gives us less conflict. So many counties and cities are in conflict constantly. They're suing each other. We have a strong mayor form of government. So everyone in the government basically works for the mayor, and we have 19 council members, 14 districts, 5 at large, and we've got a great structure. I would say we have the best, most competitive, most efficient structure you could ever ask for. And we have a lot of cities that come here to see it and to experience it and to interview us and talk about it. We're the envy of most cities from a structural standpoint. There are some downsides. It is not all good. There are some downsides. When they consolidated, there were compromises. There had to be compromises. And there were some things that came out of that compromise that you probably, if you could wave a wand, you would change. But I think the biggest casualty of a consolidated government is that downtown did lose focus because you don't have the representation. We have 14 districts. These council members are going to be responding to their residents, who are their voters. Well, there are no residents to speak of really downtown. There are more now, but relatively speaking. So those representatives are going to address the squeaky wheel, and those are people that are usually in the suburbs. So the mayors through time have been focused on downtown, and we've seen great progress on big investments because the mayor's leadership. But we do have a structural issue that is disadvantageous to downtown, but it can be overcome with awareness and through budgeting and through committed mayors and committed city council members. If I could wave a wand, I would say we need more at-large members and fewer district members, because they can take a global view, and that's when downtown wins, and when you take the global view, because downtown is everyone's neighborhood. It's where we all should come to celebrate each other, to celebrate our diversity, our places of work, our places of worship, to be entertained, to go to sporting events. The river, great access to the river. It's an amazing place, and we can overcome that, but it's more good than bad with consolidation, though. Yeah, good.
Thank you. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, I do not. I'm happy to stick around and answer questions. I'm reminded of what it was like to be in office to solve these daunting questions, and I don't get these questions anymore. And a lot of them don't have easy answers, and I'm a lot more respectful for the people that are in office that wrestle these bears every day, because there are some big challenges with no easy answers. But it's been a joy to be with all of you. Thank you for having me, and thank you to this amazing place. Kate, thank you for your leadership, and Mark, best of you as you make this your new home. So good. Thank you all so much.
Will you bow your heads and pray with me? Dear God, we thank you for John's ministry. We thank you for all the mayors of this city and the minds that you give them to wrestle with challenging obstacles, for the challenges of literacy and education and violence and homelessness. We pray that you give us wisdom on how to address these issues and commitment to stick to the solutions we find. We pray that you continue to bless our city, that we may care for those around us, that we may show your love to those around us, and that we may be a beacon to our greater state and country. In your Son's name we pray. Amen. Thank you.